Susan Collins shocked the political world when she won re-election in the state of Maine by nearly 8%. Many people, and election forecasters, including myself, counted her out. I remembered saying in one of my more recent Senate predictions for the 2020 election that all hope was lost for her. I thought Collins was done. This was my biggest swing and miss of the 2020 election. There's no prediction that I'm more embarrassed about than the Maine Senate race. I've gotten some races wrong. Going down to North Carolina, I thought Cunningham would win. He lost. I thought Donald Trump would win in Georgia. That state went to Joe Biden. But I was not nearly as wrong in any of the states as I was in the state of Maine. Now, this was a shocking development because of how polarized the nation is. Democrats there were a lot of red state Democrats running, like Steve Bullock in Montana, Barbara Boyer in Kansas, Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, who really thought they had a shot because they ran better campaigns, they had momentum, the polls were close. Yet all of them lost. Boyer lost by 11, Bullock lost by nearly 10%, Harrison lost by 10%. Another example is Al Gross in Alaska, who lost by double digits as well. All these seats were supposed to be very close. I did admittedly think that Montana, for example, had a chance of flipping. However, none of these races were particularly close. Maine could have been the opposite for the Republican Party. I said that I really could have seen a situation where Collins lost by 10% just because of Maine being a blue state in polarization. But Maine voters weren't as polarized as voters in, say, Kansas or Montana. The moderate Republican Senator, Susan Collins, won re-election because she is Susan Collins. Now, that's a pretty wishy-washy answer, so we'll have to elaborate on it. But first, I want you to process this. What if Sarah Gideon was a really bad candidate? And by really bad, I mean really bad. What if she was the Martha McSally of Maine, in that on paper she might have been a decent candidate? I mean, McSally was a fighter pilot who had, a very inspiring story. But McSally was rejected by voters twice in 2 years, and now looking back on it, she has cost the Republicans of Arizona 2 Senate seats. One belongs to Kirsten, the other belongs to Mark Kelly. Now, Sarah Gideon, she didn't have any scandals. She didn't say anything particularly bad. She wasn't super unlikable. In fact, there were a lot of people who really did like her. But I think her issue was that she wasn't exactly what Maine was looking for. Maine voters wanted someone born and raised in Maine, a moderate type senator. Now, Gideon is far from a socialist, but there were a lot of attack ads, not really from Susan Collins, but from the Maine Republican Party, that said she wanted to stack the courts and defund the police. That doesn't sit well with any group of voters, except for maybe people in New York City. Gideon was also not even from Maine. She grew up in Rhode Island and was said to be a liberal transplant from New York City, just running in Maine to unseat our senator, Susan Collins. Our senator. I think those two words won the election for Susan Collins. Our senator. Our senator. I think that the campaign that Collins ran might have been the best campaign that we've seen in this election. Certainly, there have been good campaigns. I think, for example, John Hickenlooper ran a good campaign to run for Senate in Colorado. Cory Gardner even ran a good campaign to make the Senate race somewhat contested. Donald Trump, in the closing weeks, ran a bad campaign. Joe Biden ran a lackluster campaign. But Susan Collins' campaign, I think it was perfect. Sarah Gideon didn't really have anything to offer other than I'm not Susan Collins. And when people have been voting for her for decades, since like the 1980s and 90s, that doesn't bode well. Yes, Collins has gotten increasingly unpopular, and her votes for Brett Kavanaugh didn't really help her. But I think voters in Maine didn't have that right next to their heart when they entered the ballot box. I think that Maine voters really, I'm sure there were a lot of voters who were going to vote for Sarah Gideon who switched over to Susan Collins as they walked into the ballot box. And I say this because there is something about Susan Collins that really resonated with Maine voters. I don't live in Maine, but I will tell you that Sarah Gideon wasn't the candidate for Maine. As I mentioned, she was from Rhode Island, but the issues that she brought up, like Kavanaugh, yes, voters in Maine may not have wanted Brett Kavanaugh, And yes, voters in Maine are Democrats for the most part. I mean, Joe Biden won the state by 8%. But they weren't thinking about Brett Kavanaugh when they entered the ballot box. They're thinking about our senator, the senator who'd been serving Maine, and voting sometimes with the Democratic Party. I mean, Susan Collins did vote to save healthcare in 2017. Susan Collins did vote for Obama's justices just as much as she voted for Trump justices. And I think they were thinking more about the economy, the commercial fishing industry, for example. And that is what really, really helped Susan Collins. Sarah Gideon, the only issue that she talked about even a little bit was healthcare. And yes, that got her a lot of votes. I mean, she obviously outperformed Susan Collins' previous challengers. I mean, Shanna Bellows only got 189,000 votes. Sarah Gideon got over 300,000 votes, excuse me. But there's just the way that Gideon orchestrated her campaign did not resonate with Maine voters at all. And like I said, on paper, she is a super bad candidate. I mean, she's the Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. She may be the most powerful Democrat in the Maine state legislature. But it still doesn't mean that she's ready to unseat an incumbent who'd been serving Maine with vast popularity for decades. I also think that there are just going to be there were some old timers who voted for Collins. Now, I'm not saying that that boomers voted for Collins because they're Republicans. I think Maine is actually a very old state. There are a lot of old people in Maine. Don't make a joke. And I think that a lot of them turned out for Biden. They voted for Joe Biden. And, there's this narrative that people over the age of 65 are only Republicans. There are a lot of Democrats. In a state like Maine, there are a lot of Democrats who are over the age of 65. And I think that those voters are who Susan Collins should be thanking. Because I think that they split their ticket. I think that nearly all these voters went for Susan Collins, who, yes, Susan Collins is old. She's been serving Maine for over 2 decades. And really, they split their ticket between Biden and Collins. They voted for Biden because Trump is unpopular in Maine, and Collins didn't endorse Trump, by the way, which helped her. But they voted for Collins because, yes, she did vote against Kavanaugh, but they liked everything else on her track record. She had voted, like I said, to save Obamacare. She had voted against Amy Coney Barrett. She had voted with Obama nearly 70% of the time. So Susan Collins, she had the ability to campaign on that. She didn't run a negative campaign. She ran a positive campaign about our senator, Maine senator. Sarah Gideon, she ran a negative campaign attacking one vote for Susan Collins. And yes, that got a lot of people against Collins. We still have to remember, the voters of Maine like to split their ticket. It's why Maine has had a Republican governor in recent memory, Paul LePage. Now, I'm not saying that Sarah Gideon really blew it. I mean, looking back, it's entirely possible that Collins' win was inevitable, even if Sarah Gideon had ran a better campaign. And there are still a lot of people who voted for her, obviously. She outperformed Susan Collins' previous opponent by like 150,000 votes. And she did win. She was able to flip a few counties. I mean, she won 2 counties, whereas Collins' previous opponent, Shanna Bellows, didn't win a single county. And maybe she's not at fault. I mean, looking at the U.S. Senate polls from the state of Maine, I mean, just going to Maine and pulling up the polling data, no pun intended. Sarah Gideon led nearly every poll. I mean, she was ahead by 8 in the most recent poll conducted the day before the election. The best of the best polls, an A-, or not a best, but some of these better polls, had Sarah Gideon ahead by 1, 2, 2. Now these were close margins, obviously, and she should have been more cautious, but still, the best of the best polls on September 18th sampled 663 likely voters. They had Gideon up by 5. So I really do think that Gideon maybe just didn't know, or she didn't choose to ignore the data. The data had her ahead, and that's why I forecasted a Gideon win in the state of Maine. But actually, there's one intriguing poll I want to look at. It's from More Information, and I'm not sure if that's a pun or if it's just More, sampling 600 registered voters. Neither of these candidates reached 50%, but they did a pretty good job. I mean, Collins ended up winning by a little over 8%, and they had her up by 8, getting 45% of the vote. And the undecideds, as you can see, they had to have broken for Collins. I mean, she got just over 50% of the vote. It's not a ton, but the undecideds had to have broken for Collins. And I think they did. I think independents, she held on to her independent base. And remember, independents, they like to split their ticket. Biden won the independent vote in 2020. I think that Collins definitely won the independent vote for being a moderate. Now, there were some independents who probably went for Sarah Gideon, but I think Collins won the majority. And in a small state like Maine, every vote counts. And she had high enough turnout from the 2nd District. She got the Trump voters to vote for her, even though she's very moderate and Trump is not a huge fan of Susan Collins. She got the Trump vote out. She won the moderate vote, and she still got Democrats to split their ticket, which I did not see happening. So, Susan Collins won re-election, and I think the most impressive campaign I've ever watched. And I know I'm pretty young, as you can probably tell by my voice. I've only been watching politics for 4 years, and I've seen some pretty impressive campaigns. But Susan Collins says this will be the best campaign that I've ever seen in a blue state, in a presidential election year, in a very polarized environment. Susan Collins was able to win re-election by 8%. I am Unbiased Election Predictions. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing if you have not already. I hope you enjoyed the video. Tell me what you think in the comment section down below. Why do you think Susan Collins won re-election? Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.